as I've dived more and more deeply into the coffee industry personally in my career, what I have grown to love the most out of anything is the ability and opportunity for us here at Sagebrush to interact with coffee producers throughout the world. And as we've interacted with many different coffee producers, what we've seen is a consistency in their interest in coffee varieties and the ways that they process those things. So today I'll be breaking down kind of what happens at origin for a coffee bean to go from a cherry to a dry seed that we will then buy and import into the States and roast here at a coffee roastery. So I hope to kind of open up the world of different coffee varieties and the creativity that producers enjoy and dive into at origin. In order to get a proper understanding of varieties, I think we need to take a step back and kind of get a glimpse as to what the entire coffee process looks like from the beginning of the tree itself that's growing the coffee beans to the final product of that cup of coffee in your hand. So I'm just going to list everything off the top of my head as to what goes into the coffee, and then we'll go from there. So here, put these out of the way. So coffee process: planting, growing, picking, purchasing, sorting, milling, drying, sorting again. Quality control is transport, evaluation, cupping, which involves a roast at some point in time before then. Purchasing, again, and shipment. So that's just kind of off the top of my head, some of the pieces that go into what developing coffee looks like at origin. And this is kind of in order here. And what we have are kind of three separate categories of what's handled and where the handoff might happen. There's lots of producers who are very involved in every step of this process, but there's also probably a larger percentage, I don't know exactly, but there's likely to be a larger percentage of people who are just involved in the planting, growing, picking, or just involved in the purchasing, sorting, milling, drying, and sorting, and just involved in the quality control aspect. This is kind of a little micro glimpse, or like a microscope into this piece of the supply chain. And it's consistent to that of any agricultural sort of thing. You know, you have these farmers who are dedicating their lives to the planting, the growing, and the picking of the coffee. And that's what we'll be focusing on primarily, but it's helpful to just see, oh, it's not just that when it comes to the production of coffee and the opportunities for us to be able to have the green coffee come to us as a roaster is all because of the intense care that people are putting into each and every one of these steps. So when it comes to planting, this is something that farmers are always kind of experimenting with. That's what I've noticed, especially I've taken 2 trips to origin. I've been to Guatemala and to Colombia. And in those 2 trips, I've visited probably about a dozen total farms. And with each of those farms, we see interesting kind of creativity that these farmers have in incorporating different coffee varieties. A quick 101 on coffee varieties is, think of it like apple varieties. When we go to a grocery store, there's lots of different types of apples, and each one of them have a unique flavor profile. Say a Red Delicious is going to taste a lot different than a Granny Smith, but both of them are technically apples. The same principle applies to that of coffee. When farmers are growing coffee trees, Arabica trees, there's different types of fruit that's produced, but they're all under the category of Arabica. So we have Bourbon, we have Caturra, Catuai, we have Geisha, Pacamara, you name it. There's lots of different coffee varieties. There's far more than I can even count probably. And with that comes the opportunity for farmers to experiment and play with those different flavor profiles and utilize those flavor profiles in how they think about processing and maximizing the natural flavor profile of each of those coffee varieties. I'm not as experienced in the world of understanding different varieties to be able to tell you, oh yeah, that's Catuai, oh yeah, that's Caturra, oh yeah, that's Bourbon. But I do have a familiarity with the slight nuance differences. When it comes to a consumer back in the United States, it's really hard to get a proper understanding of the nuances between different varieties because there's so much more that goes into play. As you can see here, there's so much more that goes into play in the coffee's flavor profile that is greater. There's so much more that goes into play in a coffee's flavor profile that is affected by more of these steps than merely the coffee's variety. There are some standout varieties in the coffee world call it the geisha variety, is known for its very sweet and floral flavor profile. And that's something that farmers really like to amplify and to put on display way more than something like a more traditional variety like a Bourbon or a Caturra. Both of those are varieties that farmers really like to put on display as well, but their flavor profiles are not going to be, call it, more obvious to an average consumer than something like a geisha. If you're familiar with specialty coffee, then you're probably familiar with the word geisha, and that is just one of many examples of a coffee variety. And the geisha variety is famous because it's very obvious the flavor profile that it picks up versus like a more traditional variety. When I was in Colombia about a month ago, I was able to try many different coffees, all wash process, all consistent to the way that they were produced, all consistent in the sense that they were all from the same region of Colombia. So there was a lot of factors, scientifically speaking, that are out of the way for me to be able to evaluate the differences in different coffee varieties. And it's certainly noticeable. You can certainly detect those differences and the differences in flavor profile from variety to variety. But when we're trying, lots of different coffees throughout the entire world with different regions, different terroirs, different processing methods, then it's a lot harder to say, oh, this tastes different because it's a Caturra, not a Bourbon. You know what I mean? So what's interesting at Origin is these farmers, there is a slight ceiling to what they can experiment with because not every variety works in every region or every soil. But we see a lot of farmers playing with the ideas of like, we're going to try this variety out. We planted these trees and maybe in a couple of years they'll start producing fruit. And we'll be able to see how that affects the quality of our cup scores as a farm and potentially improve upon the quality that we're producing, that we're outputting into the coffee space. So we've had lots of interactions with farmers who are excited about the idea of varieties because there certainly is a nuance. And when it comes to a farm back at Origin, say Colombia, I was in San Agustin in Colombia, and many of those farmers don't have the land that is necessary to produce high quantity coffees, but more so high quality coffees is what they're focused on. That's how they can maintain a good livelihood for them and their families, and hopefully for their sons to take on the business moving into the next generation. So we've interacted with farmers who are very much involved in the coffee scene, very much focused on the quality of the coffee because there is a direct correlation to the money that they get because of that. So because of that, we have a lot of experimentation that takes place at Origin. They really like just the idea of, oh man, if this coffee variety takes off, if it plants and works really well in my farm and produces a much higher quality cup than I'm used to, that could be the difference in $10,000 at the end of the year for you and your family, which is huge. So there's certainly a fascination and a factor of like, this will help me and my family out when we're playing with different varieties. I feel like I rambled a lot and I feel like I gave a lot of high level stuff, but hopefully that was kind of a cool glimpse into why varieties are important at Origin and why they may not be super detectable here as consumers, but why ultimately they're foundational to the coffee process method at Origin for farmers, and gives farmers the opportunity to be creative and to experiment with different things in the coffee industry and hopefully affect their livelihoods in a beneficial way. We here at Sagebrush enjoy the opportunity to be able to see those differences in varieties very clearly on a cupping table and be able to experience those things in a more confined, like scientific context where we have same region, same farm, different variety. And that gives us a glimpse into it far more than probably an average consumer like you at home would be able to, because a lot of roasters, they're not curating in the sense of like, I want everything from the same region, just different varieties. You know, that's not something that's very common at all. So what I really wanted with this video is just communicate how important varieties are and how hidden they may be to an average American consumer. And it's just really fascinating. I love chatting coffee industry stuff. So I hope you found this interesting. If you did, go ahead and give us a subscribe, like this video, give a comment. If you have further questions, I'd love to answer questions. And this process, you know, this transcends far more videos than I could probably record in a single day. So if you guys are interested to kind of learn more about what happens at origin, that's something I'm very much familiarized with, having been at origin multiple times with multiple different farmers in multiple different countries. And I'd love to just talk that with you guys. So thanks for listening, and have a good rest of your day.